Hey everyone, this is the Drake Martinez podcast. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about all things immigration, illegal immigration, legal immigration, what's been going on, and what you need to know. So it's a really hot button topic right now. This is what everyone has been talking about, and during the 2016 election, when you had like the build the wall chants, people were like, "Hey, illegal immigration is too much. What's been going on at the border? How are people getting here illegally? Why are so many illegal immigrants committing crimes and not being deported?" And, we saw a bit of a decline during the Trump administration, not just from his policies, but also due to COVID in general, that there wasn't, it put a pause on that global migration that was going on. And a lot of it sort of like became out of control during, again, the Obama administration after the Syrian civil war, and there was that mass migration of illegal immigration going from parts of the Middle East, Africa, and going to Western Europe, Eastern Europe for the largest, for a good portion of Eastern Europe did not allow, especially countries like Poland, did not allow migrants into their countries, but Western Europe and the United States, Canada did. So here we are, 2024, and we have just year after year, ever since Biden President Biden came into office, that we've had record numbers of illegal immigrants crossing the border and entering into the United States illegally. And not only that, but they have been given a temporary asylum status. So all these people need to do is show up to the border and say, "Hey, I fear to go back to my country for whatever reason." Some of them claim, for sexual reasons, political reasons, or just no reason at all. Just show up at the border, and they are processed by the Border Patrol, which is under the Department of Homeland Security. And once they get into the interior, they are given a court date. Sometimes those court dates are 7 years into the future because of the backlog. And a lot of people speculate that those people are not going to show up for those court dates, but I predict that a lot of them will, actually, because by then a lot of them are going to have children here. They're going to be parents of U.S. citizens, because all it requires in order to be a U.S. citizen is to be naturally born. So a lot of things go into this, and there's a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot of confusion, and a lot of people that really aren't telling you the truth about how immigration in this country actually works. Not just illegal immigration, but legal immigration, because both are important to be understood in order to bring about a sensible solution to what is a problem that doesn't need to be a problem, essentially. So when we're talking about illegal immigration, what we're talking about is people foreign nationals entering the country of the United States via its borders illegally, whether this be, crossing the border in Texas, Arizona, or even in the north, people that are come from Canada and cross into the border illegally into the United States. And what are we talking about when we say that these people are here illegally? What we're talking about is no one has the right to be in the United States interior, in the the continental United States or Hawaii or Alaska, without authorization. If you're a U.S. citizen, you don't need authorization. You're a citizen of the country. You're able to come and go within the United States interior as you see fit. You're able to go from Texas to Alabama to Massachusetts to Washington State to Florida. Any state within the interior, you have the right of a citizen to travel to and from as you see fit. Even to move or to change your residence. That, however, each state is its own quasi country, but the definition, or how we think about states, changed after the Civil War, Prior to the Civil War, it's very famous saying that prior to the Civil War, it was the United States are. On most documents, you will see things like the United States are because each state was considered its own country, and the federal government sort of like was this umbrella term that unified the different countries of the United States loosely. But after the United States, it changed from the United States are to the United States is, and it became much more of a, kind of like singular entity, but the clear definitions of statehood are still established in, various states' law and also in the Constitution, especially if you look at the 9th and 10th Amendments. Okay, well, so we got that understood. So what exactly is an illegal immigrant? Now, an immigrant doesn't have authority to enter the United States unless they have what's called a visa. For any American that's traveled abroad and you go to a country, it might seem weird to us, like this idea of a visa, but what's actually happening is when you go to another country, because you have an American passport, they want you there. So you didn't have to apply for a visa because you can just show up at the country a lot of the times and just get one. I know that, that's kind of weird for us to understand, but because of your American passport, you show up. For example, I went to Bahrain one time. And when I went to Bahrain, I showed up at the airport. I didn't have a visa. I didn't have any real reason for showing up there other than for military duties. But my orders didn't say that. So they said, oh, well, you're here for military duties. Your orders don't say that, but, maybe we can figure something out once you get in. Would you like to purchase a passport, a visa for, I believe it was like 2 weeks? And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. I'll purchase a 2-week visa. It was like $50 at the, at the customs and border entry point. I got my visa. They stamped it on my passport. And then I had legal access and entry into the country of Bahrain. Now, if I had crossed the border into Saudi Arabia from there, just hopped the border, I would be there illegally, meaning I didn't have authorization to enter the country. So for a lot of you Americans that have never dealt with that or don't know exactly how that works in America, it's actually really difficult to get authorization to come into the United States. We have different visas for different purposes, and a lot of those can be purchased or petitioned for based off of different circumstances. For example, if you're like, hey, how do people come here from different countries? Well, a lot of times they come here on what's called like a visitor's visa or a B2 visa, meaning, that these people are coming here from, let's say, Japan. You have travelers from Japan who are like, I really want to go see Yosemite. They have to apply for that B2 visa in advance. Not only do they have to apply in advance and pay for it, but they have to provide reasoning and documentation that provides USCIS, which is the United States Customs and Immigration Services, evidence that they're not just going to show up here and then have children. So in other words, if a pregnant woman from Japan was trying to come into the United States legally, that is to say on a B2 visa, then USCIS would deny her entry into the United States because they don't want that person's child to be born here and become a citizen, right? Now, a lot of the times when you have a B2 visa, part of the evidence is showing that like the person has reason to stay back at their home country. So again, let's go back to Japan. Let's say you have two people that are trying to come from Japan. One is a 19-year-old female who is like unmarried, has no children, and really doesn't have any, job or prospects to stay in Japan. Well, USCIS might look at that and be like, hey, this person, could get a 30-day visa to come into the United States, but they're pretty likely to get, maybe when they get here to pay an American to, marry them. And then now they have a petition for a green card based off of a family-based green card. We'll get into a little bit more of that in a little bit. Now, they could juxtapose that to a 35-year-old, Japanese man who wants to come to, go rock climbing in Yosemite, but he's got a business in Japan. He's got, family. He's got reasons to stay in Japan, to go back there. And it's very clear that all he wants to do is come here for a few weeks, do some rock climbing, do some sightseeing, and then go back to Japan. USCIS will look at that man as a very low risk and will most likely grant his access to come into the United States as a visitor. Then we have, student visas, F1 visas. There's J1 visas that are issued by the State Department, usually through negotiations or treaties that we have with different countries for different reasons that we might allow some of their scientists or researchers to come in and go to schools here on a J1 visa. It's pretty similar to F1, but they have like work authorization. Except for on the F1, they don't. So a lot of people that are coming here as foreign exchange students or coming here, on just to study, it might take them some time before they can even get what's called like an OPT or a work authorization that will allow them to work legally in the United States. Emphasis on the word legally. And then there's, EB visas that people can just essentially purchase, or investment visas that they, are going to open up a business here in the United States. And then you have family-based green cards, which are, permanent residency. Now, everything that was discussed, is non-resident visas, meaning that the people that are coming here are coming temporarily. Even F1, those people that come here on a student visa, they're here for the duration of their stay, which is when you see like a DS on their passport, that's what it says. It means like duration of stay, that person can stay for the duration of their time in which they're studying. And then once they're done studying, they're either going to have to find a company to petition for them via what's called like the PERM cases, which is like an employment-based green card. Everything prior to that, even like an H-1B visa, which grants temporary, not residency, but just temporary access to the United States, but also entails work authorization. And a lot of those are really restricted, that person can only work for that company for a certain amount of time for a very specific, what they call prevailing wage. So if you hear anybody say that the immigration system has been broken, like Alejandro Mayorkas likes to say this all the time, it's actually not. They talk about this system like it's been, just invented last year or 6 months ago. Like, just like when you read 1984, when they just like pretend that you don't have a memory, that, the previous administration had the border closed due to an executive order, but they're making it sound like that they need more congressional laws to supplement the authority that the president has in order to be able to close the border. That's just not true. Recent history, let alone extended history, would show that that's not true. So what exactly are they talking about? Well, what they're talking about is just a lie. As I just detailed, as a matter of fact, I would encourage anybody that doesn't know what I'm talking about, or I kind of went over it really quickly, I highly encourage you to go on to uscis.gov. It's the United States Custom and Immigration Services. These are the people that handle immigration. Just go to the website and you can download the documents that people need to file in order to come into the United States legally. It's extensive paperwork. It's very expensive, and it only applies in very specific and extenuating circumstances. Asylum is no different. Asylum has been established for decades at this point, and as far as I know, the only recent accommodations that have been made that expanded asylum was the VAWA Act, which is the Violence Against Women Act. I think it was VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, which was, I believe, from my memory serves me correct, was like in order to petition for people that were coming from different countries that didn't really have access to go to an embassy or things like that, that they could apply like secretively, in order to escape, violence. And I think maybe like a lot of it was targeted for women in Afghanistan and women in the Middle East that were afraid, not just for political reasons, but for reasons, or like religious reasons, but for also just reasons based on the fact that there's a lot of persecution of women in those areas. So, as far as I know, that was the only one that was extended that was not based off of like a political circumstance. There is no economic asylum. You can't just show up at the border and say, or apply rather, and go to an embassy and apply for for asylum, and say, hey, you know what? I'm really poor here. I don't like it. I'd really like to go to the United States. Based off of that reason. And the United States will say, hey, you know what? That's not a valid reason. You have to show the fact that, if there was political persecution, or if you were being targeted, or if you were afraid to go to your country for X, Y, and Z, reasons, but you can't just say like it's because I need a better life, or I need better circumstances, and the United States can offer me and provide those to me, so therefore I have a right to come. Now we're getting into like what is the crux of the problem that's coming up at the border, where if you have, I was just doing the numbers yesterday. If the numbers are correct, that we've had close to 10 million people in the last, let's say 3 years, let's say 4 years, that have come across the border. That is essentially the population of Honduras. Honduras is about 14 million people. And if we know about 10 million people that have come across the border in the last 3 years, those are the known entries. In other words, there's a certain amount of unknown entries that are just the nature of like how people got into the United States interior illegally in the past, right? They would cross the Sonoran Desert, or maybe travel by sea going into into the Caribbean, and would make their way into the United States. And a lot of people did that not just via the border and Mexico, but before that, there was a lot of people coming from Haiti, Cuba, that would travel on boats coming into the United States across the Caribbean. Okay, so what is the problem? What's the problem with illegal immigration? What sort of impact is this having on our country as a whole? Well, a lot of people. Let's talk about that and dissect that a little bit. There's, for one, a problem of population. Now, congressional seats in districts are determined by population. And if a census occurs and that there's X amount of residents, and a lot of them that are coming across the border now are given work authorization, which is crazy, absolutely crazy. But despite the other services that they're receiving work authorization. Again, if you paid $5,000 in attorney fees and another $5,000 in order to obtain an H-1B visa to come here from India and wait years and years in line to be able to come and work at a company like, I'm not going to say any specific companies, but work at, a software engineering firm, which is a lot of, folks from India come because they have such great software engineering companies and programs in India. And then they come here and they work for what I was talking about, the prevailing wage. And you spent $12,000 and waited years in line to come into the United States to get work authorization to work at one of those companies. Well, you were a fool. You could have just waited for the current administration, taken a flight, gone into Mexico, paid some drug cartel coyotes some money, hope that they don't really do anything to you beyond that, and make your way into the United States and claim political asylum at the border. And instead of pleading your case in the past, what you had to do like at an embassy, you just go into the interior, wait 7 years, and now you can work with with work authorization, for free. I guess they're just giving it to them when, if you can go onto the USCIS.gov website and you can see how much it would cost people that are waiting in line to do the paperwork the right way. That the I-765, which is the work authorization document, I think it costs like $400 for people to process it, you know? So again, going back to this idea of the districting. Now, if you have a population of people that are coming in and they're going into your city, and the city population expands because of all the new illegal immigrants that have come in, well, that city just got a congressional seat. And cities that aren't getting all these illegal immigrants, aren't getting seats. So who do you think that these politicians are going to be pandering to? And that's not to say that in years in the future, just like how they tried with DACA to provide people that entered the country illegally as children, to give them work authorization and then a path to citizenship, that who's to say that that's not going to be proposed 10, 15 years from now with the current wave of illegal immigrants. And they even have a stronger claim towards it because, at least in the past, they weren't like advertised to come. Their parents just crossed the border, with them. But now it's like being advertised. It's like, come to America, cross the border. The border's wide open. We'll let you in, and we'll give you work authorization and a place to stay. And, depending on the city that you go to, you might get $10,000 in support to stay here. And, we're going to treat you a certain way, so that you have a comfortable life as you're transitioning here. Well, that sounds a lot like you're welcoming them. So they probably would have a good legal case in 15 to 20 years from now to say, hey, you know what? We do deserve like some type of DACA because we don't deserve to be kicked out. That administration at the time advertised for us to come. That's and again, if that would be like what the Obama administration tried to do with people with DACA, and I think it was like circa like 2012. Why? This begs the question of like, why do they need a quote unquote path to citizenship? Well, USCIS makes this very clear, and this is when you look at the documents. The one that you should look at would be what's called the I-485. Now, the 485 is like the green card application. So now that would be like an immigrant, illegal or not. But we're going to get into this. An immigrant is trying to transition from what's called a non-resident to a resident, meaning that they're going from a status where they're just here like for work, or they're just here to visit, or they're here as a student, to a green card holder, a permanent resident. Now, what entails permanent residency is pretty much everything below voting. So they're not an American, they don't have an American citizenship, but they do have a right to, buy property or, live here and work whatever job that they want, own a business, etc. They just can't vote, and they can't run for certain offices, and then they can't hold like, top secret or secret security clearances, things like that. And then if you go on to the I-485 document, what you'll see is they're going to ask you, the immigrant, a series of questions. And if any one of them is marked a no, then that person is like red flagged. And some of those questions include things that you wouldn't think that would be on there, but they are. And there's some of those questions are like, do you belong to a communist party? Did you ever belong to a communist party? Did you ever persecute people for political beliefs? And then some of them on there is like, did you ever illegally enter the United States? So our immigration code, in other words, if these people aren't having issues with their immigration paperwork or their immigration status now, they will in the future. And people that know immigration know this. So then why are they accommodating it? Why are they allowing this to happen? Is it ignorance, or do they have some type of other motive? And at this number and at this rate, with the devastating effects that, and we haven't even discussed things like the drug trafficking that happens at the border, the human trafficking that happens at the border, the loss of life that happens at the border of people that try to cross the Sonoran Desert or try to cross into the Rio Grande, that they die. A lot of them die from the journey. And if the government knows, one, that these people that enter need the rules to be broken temporarily and in the long run for them to be able to even have a life here, and that it's coming at the taxpayer's expense, and that the United States isn't really benefiting anything from this because these are people that are too poor. They're too they're too poor to even apply or do things the appropriate way. You know, they don't have the money to pay for for asylum applications, or for F1 visa applications, or for any one of those legal methods in which they can come into the United States. So they just show up. So they somehow got, one way or another. And we haven't even talked about like the national security dangers that come from just opening the border, whereby like the coyotes will bring, people that are looking for asylum or people that are looking for the border patrol, and distract the border patrol at one gate and then flood drugs in through the other, while they know that the border patrol is busy processing the people that are claiming asylum at the border. So this creates, I hope this makes it clear that there is just like a compound interest of problems, national security issues, population issues. We haven't even discussed the fact that once these people come to the United States, that they're a drain on social services, that there's already an epidemic of homelessness in a lot of American cities, especially on the West Coast. The fentanyl, the drugs, the human trafficking, the issues that occur later on when you have such difficulty integrating and assimilating all these people into the United States is a problem of its own. I come from a family of immigrants, but they came here legally on both sides. And on the Greek side of my family, the town in which I grew up in, there's a lot of places around there that, have like Greek writing, and, a lot of places that are tailored towards Greek Americans, people that have been here, maybe like a generation or two. Some of them weren't born here, and they have like different clubs or restaurants that have Greek writing, and it might taken a generation or two before some of those people learned the language. And then those were people that were paying money and wanted to come here and wanted to have a good life in America. And I'm not saying that all these people that are coming across the border don't want that either, but they have less incentive to learn the language, learn the culture, and be part and assimilate into the United States if they don't have a reason to. People by their nature do what's comfortable for them. So there's reasons why there's like Little Japan, little like Koreatown in Los Angeles, and Greek parts of your town in Boston and Clearwater, Florida. And there's reasons why Pennsylvania was like Dutch country, and there's reasons why you have parts of New York that were like really Italian, because those people moved to be around like their families, right? And it might take a generation or two or three before parts of these parts of those cities become like more integrated and more Americanized and more assimilated. But that is with controlled immigration. That's with a trickle effect of like taking in a certain quota. So another thing that a lot of Americans don't know is, the United States doesn't just take people in legally. However many applications we get, we're going to process them. No, there's things called chargeability countries, which means if the United States gets too many applications from, I think the top 4 countries that continuously get put on the chargeability rates are India, China, Mexico, and then the Philippines. And depending on how many applications that they get for different processing applications, like let's say for resident versus non-resident applications, green card versus, F1 or like student visas and such, there might be a wait of 10 years on some of those applications. So it begs the question again, if we're taking in people at a slow trickling rate because they know that, like, oh, we've taken in too many people, so in order for them to be properly assimilated, we're going to process some of the applications 5 to 10 years behind, then why are they having the border open? The only thing that can make sense is one, and I hate to, to go off on this, but is that there has to be a political reason behind it. That they must have some type of long-term plan that will enable these people to come in and vote for a certain political group that has allowed them to come in and will later on give them a pathway to citizenship. But I don't think that the average American nor many of the politicians have the foresight and the long-term strategy or the long-term vision of like what that actually entails. So in the short term, what are they gaining from that? Well, they're essentially gaining a underclass of people that don't have any room for upward mobility and social mobility in the United States. And I think that in the long run is what they're really after. What they're really after is being able to reduce the social mobility that the United States had since its inception. That this was one of the few countries on the planet that you can come here with no education, work hard, learn the language, learn how people worked here, start a business, start a family, own your own property, and become an American and have that social mobility that would allow you to, over the course of generations, build a better life for yourself and your family. And in order for them to maintain the stranglehold of reducing that social mobility and maintaining control, that they need a class of people that don't know what that is. They need a class of people that are coming from all over the world to come in and not be indoctrinated, not be assimilated, not understand what the Constitution is, and have no desire to really become an American. Because I think an American that knows their rights, that knows how the system works, knows the different branches of government, knows how the city, state, and federal level are all fractal. That at the city level, you have legislative, judicial, and executive. At the state, you have legislative, executive, and judicial. And then you have that in the executive and the federal government as well. And that the federal government was never designed to be as big and as encompassing as it is. And that actually the one constitutional authority that the federal government has is to protect the border. And it is to protect and maintain authority over the border and for the ports of entry and for ports in general. It's one of the few areas of responsibilities that was outlined in the Constitution for the federal government. And then look what it did for that responsibility. Just totally abdicated it. Not only did it abdicate it, it actively and aggressively prevents Texas from protecting the border. So what else could it be? And I think, I'll sum this up with just that there's a lot of people that have really misguided sympathy and kindness for what's happening at the border. And I think what would really help is if we were able to determine that there is a certain separation between the individual and policy. So of course there would be no doubt that on a human one-to-one level that you could have sympathy and want to help people that come across the border looking for a better life. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt that that would be the humane thing to do on an individual level. The problem is overall that it's not feasible. We can't provide that level of care and accommodation for the other 7.5 billion people in the world. And if you were to do it, it couldn't happen at the rate that it's been occurring at. Like I said before, in the matter of 3 years, we took in the country of Honduras. There's a separate issue that occurs from this, which is we are actually hurting those countries in the long run. That they've done lots of studies on this that from, I think it was like the 1970s on, that the amount of people that were coming, it wasn't just the amount of people, it was the quality of people that were coming into the United States from different countries were the exact people that could have helped those countries develop. And it's a very well-established fact. It's called the brain drain. That as the United States, we were only taking in the best and the brightest from other countries, the creme de la creme, as they call it. What effect did that have on those other countries? To lose their doctors, their lawyers, their educated class people, their upper class people. And of course, you have sympathy for those people as well, because of course, why wouldn't they want a better life? The fact is that we have to have a system that acknowledges this, has kindness, and takes people in when it's done a certain way, when it's done in a way that will allow people to come in and become assimilated and become Americans. Because another thing that we haven't really talked about but would be helpful to talk about is there's nothing really that unites Americans. I would encourage other Americans out there to go travel to other countries. Go to the Philippines. One of the things that struck me when I went to the Philippines was that everyone, more or less, was Filipino. And that might sound weird, but of course, what else would they be? But in America, you have black people, you have white people, you got Hispanics, you got people from all over the world all coming together in one place. Well, what unites us used to be a common understanding of how our system of government works, what our rights are, what our obligations are to, civic responsibility and such. Again, that is what exactly will be eroded with the influx of people that don't get assimilated. They aren't going to have that national identity. What's that going to do to the military? All you need to do is look at Rome, and you'll understand very quickly what that did for the Roman military when they stopped indoctrinating people and making them legitimate Roman citizens, and then just started taking in Germanic mercenaries. What that did for Rome. So if we continue on this course, it will be a destruction of the United States. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. How much longer can we keep the border open, have people flood in that don't know what it means to even be an American, and perpetuate a system that's not based on ethnic background, that's not based off of even a common language anymore, and see how long that system survives. So I think I probably left you guys with a lot of information. And again, I would encourage you to be way more familiar with how the legal immigration system works. Because the stuff that people throw out there with, it's a broken immigration system, is just not correct. It needs a lot of reforming, but it's long established. And it needs a lot of new incentives to drive people to become assimilated. One way that they could do that is by making English the official, not de facto language of the United States, and have all of the paperwork that's being done in English only. And then the N400, which is the citizenship exam, being done in only English. Believe it or not, they have different languages that they allow people to take the citizenship exam in, because it's English is not the official language, but the de facto language of the United States. And you can go online and find different N400 forms and see that I'm not making that up. That you could take that test in, this is the citizenship test in English or a variety of other languages, English or Spanish and a variety of other languages. So we don't have standards for immigration anymore because of what's been happening at the border. And then how can USCIS even take money from people that are trying to come into the country legally when the border is open? It's like massive fraud. It's like, why would you buy an iPhone when all you got to do is break into Target and just get them for free? All you got to do is just steal them. There aren't going to be any repercussions. And when you steal them, Apple will just, give you 10 months free of, all their like Apple products and Apple services for a reward for going in and stealing the iPhone. It's kind of like how this is actually playing out. But we have a long established immigration system. Yes, it needs a lot of reforms. I think, if I want to talk a little bit more about things that would improve the illegal immigration system, I think that they could do a different class of visas that would allow people temporary permanent residency that would be contingent on, if they move to not a non-major city. So, for example, if they took, if they got rid of like the lottery system and replaced it with temporary residency status, let's say for like 3 years, and then during those 3 years they get work authorization to work in a small town and learn English, like learn how small towns operate here in the United States. And that would reduce like the clutter that happens with a lot of, like how I mentioned earlier, where people kind of like all just like move to the same spot. Where if the federal government looked at like immigration services and said like, yeah, we can move this couple, this family from, name the country, like Nepal or Cambodia. And, they don't have a lot of money, but, they're a family. They want to come to the United States and petition to live here. Let's give them a temporary green card to live in, name a small town in, Alabama or Mississippi or Georgia. And then they live there and work there for, 3 years. And then after the 3 years is up, if they, can pass, a light version of the citizenship test and are fluent in English or have at least like a good proficiency of English and they like it here, then their temporary green card goes to a full green card. And then, they can move to whatever city or area that they want. And now they're permanent residents. And I think that would do a lot of, actually like assimilating people and, having them learn English and having them learn the culture and have an appreciation for, the opportunities that come along here. Because, I think that's not going to be in supply from the people that are just crossing the border and expecting entitlements right away. But I'll leave it with that. And maybe, what other solutions do you guys think are coming up that you could come up with for fixing the immigration system or making it better? And what are your thoughts on the open border? Okay, well, with that, I'm going to sign out and I'll let you guys, we'll have another episode or two coming up in this week. But yeah, that's it for Monday. I'll see you guys later.